Hello and welcome to the Erlang Solutions monthly webinar. My name is Mladen Milikšić and I'm the VP for the EMEA region here at Erlang Solutions. Today's webinar represents a continuation of a series of webinars we are organizing across topics of interest in the world of Erlang and dealing with solutions based on the Erlang language. Now, our topic today will be dealing with Riak specifically, the NoSQL distributed key value database. And as many of you will know, Riak has emerged from the ideas laid out in the Dynamo paper, which itself inspired a number of NoSQL database solutions. Now, Riak has proven very capable indeed across industries and its target use cases, and has most recently experienced a wide adoption across financial services, online retail, healthcare, betting and gaming, and many other sectors. Large users of Riak today include the NHS, companies such as Bet365, Rovio, and many others. But as with any live event, please excuse any technical issues that we may face today. Now, to start by telling you a bit about Erlang Solutions, I'll briefly say that we are a products and services orientated company completely devoted to the Erlang programming language. We started in 1999 and we've since worked with organizations and individuals using Erlang, helping them evolve the language and supporting people and businesses using it. Nowadays, we have just over 100 people across our offices in London, Stockholm, Krakow, Budapest, Seattle, and Buenos Aires, and working on projects across the globe. We are equally very keen on creating value and competitive advantage for our customers across industries, and really in all areas where Erlang as a language makes sense. We are equally ambitious in development of Erlang-based products, and we work to create lasting partnerships with our customers, as you may imagine. I'm really pleased to say that we have two speakers joining us today and whom we have carefully selected as best invited to tell you about Riak, and in particular its newly launched 2.0 version. Firstly, Manu Marchal, the Managing Director of Basho EMEA, will start us off with an introduction to Basho. Secondly, we are really privileged to have Tyler Hammond, the Technical Marketing Director at Basho, as our main speaker. Both Manu and Tyler have spent years in the NoSQL space and can relate the fine-grained detail of the intricacies of Riak, the many benefits of the 2.0 version, and what that means towards Riak target use cases. Now, please allow me to finish by saying you are most welcome to post questions throughout the duration of the webinar by using the chat facility. Our speakers, Manu and Tyler, will answer as many questions as time allows at the end of the webinar. If any questions do go unanswered, you're welcome to raise them via email using the following address, webinar@erlang-solutions.com. If you're interested in learning more about Riak 2.0 or wish to establish whether it may be a solution for the challenges your own business may be facing, then please feel free to contact us and we will be glad to discuss. I would now like to hand over to Manu, who will be glad to start us off.
Thank you very much, Mladen, and good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Manu Marchal. I'm the Managing Director for Basho Technologies in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I'm really pleased to be here on this webinar today. As Mladen introduced, we're going to cover the latest release of Riak 2.0 with Tyler presenting this. Before that, a quick word about Basho as a company. The company was created in 2008 and currently has a little bit over 100 employees around the world. Our headquarters are in Seattle in the United States. Our core engineering office are distributed around the world, but we seem to have a cluster of people around Cambridge on the east coast of the States. Our European headquarters are in London, where we got a team of close to 15 people now, and we also have offices in Tokyo. We are perfectly suited to provide critical services to our customers around the world with 24/7, 30-minute response time for all their needs. Basho was created to address the needs of customers needing very reliable, available, and scalable data platforms. Today, Riak, which is an open source product, addresses these needs. And Mladen mentioned a couple of our customers in the EMEA region. One is the NHS, the National Health Services in the UK. To me, the NHS demonstrate very well why people care about Riak and why they would consider Riak over traditional relational database. When you talk about the NHS, you're talking about storing patients' records, and the NHS themselves describe it as life or death data. Data that cannot get wrong, data that cannot be lost, where each and every single write must be accepted. And traditionally, that has been the realm of relational database. But Riak, as one of this new generation of distributed database, has matured enough that we can now address critical use cases, such as the one of the NHS. Today, customers turn to Riak when they have critical data needs, such as the NHS, but equally in the financial world, in the gaming and gambling world, in the telco world. All these organizations are now turning to Riak to achieve very high scalability and availability at a fraction of the cost that they could with relational database. That's a very quick introduction, and I'd like now to hand over to Tyler, who will tell you all about Riak and, most importantly, our newest release, Riak 2.0, which was released in September.
Excellent. Thank you, Manu. I appreciate that introduction. So we've entitled the first webinar in this series of webinars about Riak 2.0, Infinite Scale Gets Easier. And at first glance, that might be the kind of message that makes you turn your head a little bit sideways, and perhaps it should. Because the reality is that in database marketing, we hear terms like 100% uptime and infinite scale and online arguments about SQL versus NoSQL versus new SQL, and people talking about living in a nanosecond world. But the reality is we're all deploying databases to meet a specific business need, and that business need lies somewhere in between the requirements of scalability, uptime, availability, speed, and style of deployment. So at Basho, when we talk about Riak, or when we talk about Riak CS, instead of talking about NoSQL or uptime or scale, we talk about distributed systems. But why distributed systems? The reality is that everything works at small scale. That's the beauty of computing, is that at smaller scales, things work great, but the challenge lies in scaling out, whether that's up or down, both predictably and linearly. If I get a known number of operations per second at 5 servers in a node or 5 nodes in a cluster, I want to get that same linear progression if I add 10 nodes instead. We know that things work at small scale, but what happens when something goes wrong? As our data set and as our requirements begin to grow, we need to understand the realities around server, network, or data center failures. And ultimately, I think the one thing that all of us can agree on is that the customer experience matters. And data locality enables data operations to be close to the end user. So the way that I like to think about that is that when you have a tool or a solution that is solving the needs of developers, of operations, meeting customers' expectations, and ultimately people are able to sell it, because at some point we are all indeed in sales, that is something that's compelling. It's something that will make your customers happy. That's a distributed system. So with that in mind, why Riak? So this is, of course, an update about Riak 2.0, so maybe many of you on the call are familiar with what Riak is, but I'm going to give you just a brief overview of why we consider Riak one of the best distributed databases there is. And really, we tend to group those into these 5 categories. The things that matter about Riak is its low latency, its availability characteristics, especially during times of failure, which leads to its fault tolerance. And all of those are great, but unless it's also operationally simple to utilize, it's somewhat meaningless to have a database that's very fast if you can't run it. And then Riak is also eminently scalable. So what do we feel makes Riak unique? It's built with a highly available architecture that enables any node to service read-or-write requests. Riak is masterless. The great part about that is that there is no single point of failure in that scenario, you're able to round-robin request to any node in the cluster and get the answer back, whether that's a get or a put, a read or a write. You don't have to worry about a single coordinating node or a master node. It easily scales and expands. We've talked briefly, I mentioned the scalability characteristic of Riak being something that's quite important. You're able to scale Riak simply by adding additional commodity hardware, whether that be an instance in a cloud service provider or whether that be physical hardware. And Riak, because of its ability to scale, is able to handle really very impressive amounts of data. And then ultimately, we also provide Riak CS. Riak and Riak CS are both built on the same platform, which allows for multi-model support. Riak CS is an object store that's S3 compatible, and so I'm able to have a key value store and an object store from the same platform. So with that in mind, why Riak 2.0? What were we setting out to achieve when we built a new version of Riak? So Riak 2.0 is designed to provide application developers enhanced usability and scalability for faster development of these highly available, globally scalable applications while ensuring operational simplicity. This was a big release for Basho. This is a release that we put a substantial amount of time and effort into. And what we came up with was really 5 key areas where we've made updates to what Riak is and what Riak does. The first is in Riak Search. The second is Riak Data Types. We've changed our security subsystem. We've added some operational enhancements, and we've built in some tiered storage capability. I'm going to talk through each of these in some measure of detail. So as I said, one of the first and perhaps one of the coolest, I think, things that we've done is we've changed the way that we've done Riak Search entirely. So in Riak 2.0, Riak Search combines the characteristics that we expect from Riak with the powerful search functionality of Apache Solr. So if you're not familiar with Solr, Solr is an outgrowth of the Lucene project. It's an open source capability. What we've done is we've actually integrated that tightly with Riak, and that allows for distributed, scalable, transparent indexing and querying of Riak data values. So you can build Solr queries just like you're used to building Solr queries. You can use tools that talk to the Solr API when it's appropriate, and you can get that same rich full-text search capability that's offered from Solr with the availability, fault tolerance, and operational simplicity characteristics of Riak. We support multiple languages, geospatial search, analyzers, tokenizers, filters, pretty much the various types that you would expect. For automatic data extraction, you can actually write your own custom extractor as well if you have a binary type that you're storing in Riak that's unique to you. But why would I want to use Riak Search over just Solr by itself? One of the challenges in distributed search, particularly distributed full-text search, is keeping the indices up to date. In Riak Search, we've actually integrated Riak and Solr tightly enough that Riak Search listens for changes in the KV data and then makes the changes to the Solr indices. If you're familiar with the Riak active anti-entropy mechanism, we use that same mechanism that we use to heal data that's at rest to update indexes that have been built in Search. So there is no more manual index maintenance, which, if you've done Solr deployments in the past, can be quite onerous. And so, in keeping with that theme of operational simplicity, we've built that in to Riak Search. I talked earlier about how Riak is masterless. If my key value store is masterless, but my search mechanism isn't masterless, I'm going to have to make some very, very tough trade-offs around availability. Like, do I want search to not be highly available in my application? We've actually taken Riak Search, and because it runs on each node in the cluster, we convert a query that appears on any node into a Solr distributed search, which means that my search is distributed, which means that if I lose a node, that's probably okay because I've got the data that's stored in Riak in the other nodes, and as my indices update, I'll be able to speak to those other nodes and pull back that data via Solr distributed search. Similarly, we also take index creation commands and disseminate that information throughout the entirety of the cluster. And Riak Search actually communicates and monitors the Solar OS process. So it really is a tight integration. Rather than saying, hey, take a search utility and stand it alongside of Riak, we've coupled the two very tightly to provide for those characteristics that are expected from Riak Search. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about what's perhaps my next favorite thing, which are Riak data types. So I think it's always good to understand new offerings from the perspective of a customer. As we looked at data types with Tapjoy, they said, and this is a quote, "The new advanced data types in Riak 2.0 are a game changer for us because it makes it simple for us to manage our data model at scale that supports over 1 billion devices all around the world." But what are Riak data types? If you watched any of the footage that was from Recon this year, and if you haven't, I encourage you to go to recon.io, RICON.io. It's Basho's Distributed Systems Conference for developers. There's a wealth of amazing content, both technical and academic, combining academia and industry. And one of the topic spaces that came up frequently was this idea of what are called CRDTs. Sometimes you'll hear these referred to as commutative replicated data types, or convergent replicated data types, or conflict-free replicated data types. I tend to think of them as conflict-free, but the thing that's most important is replicated data types. So a Riak data type is a distributed data type that lets you track and update, or helps you, track and update in an eventually consistent environment. For those of you who are on the phone who are familiar with eventual consistency, I think you'll see the value of this really quickly. For those of you who may not be as familiar, one of the things that's necessary in a world of distributed systems and scale-out environments is that I have to make trade-offs between consistency models. If you're very interested in this, you can read up on what's known as the CAP theorem from Eric Brewer from Google, Dr. Eric Brewer. But the CAP theorem basically says that in the presence of a network partition, I need to make a trade-off decision between strong consistency, what you may think of as ACID transactions, and eventual consistency, where there's a possibility that if I went to read my write, I may be reading an old piece of data until that data propagates around the system. Now that's in the case of a network partition. You can think of this, or sort of reason about this, as being a simple counter. If I have a counter on one side of a network partition and I'm incrementing my counter, and I have a counter on the other side of a network partition, remember these two sides of the clusters can't speak to each other, and I begin to decrement that counter, when the partition is healed, what do I do with those two values? In the past, Basho had always said, your data is opaque to us. Your data is opaque on disk, and you will have to build your own client-side resolution logic. And in some cases, that's still a very valid and a very useful answer. But first introduced in Riak 1.4 as counters, Riak 2.0 adds sets, flags, registers, and maps, which enable you to use these pre-built data types without building client-side resolution logic. We've done that for you. That's exposed directly through the Riak Data Types API. So let's look at these data types in a little bit greater detail. Counters are very simple. As a sample use case of a counter, you could reason the idea of tracking a number of page likes. As you click like, the number increases, and maybe they unlike, and that would decrease the counter, or a number of followers. The next data type is called a flag. Flags are either enabled or disabled. You could think of that as something very simple like, has this tweet been retweeted? By clicking the retweet button, I start a series of logic, one of which could very well be enabling a flag that says this has been retweeted. Another example would be, is this user eligible for preferred pricing? Do I want to flag this user record as being eligible for preferred pricing? Then there are sets. Sets are just a collection of binary values. That could be a list of items in a shopping cart, the unique identifiers of a user's friend in the social networking app. Registers are named binary, where the value is also binary. So I could use this to store user profile names I could store a primary search location for a search engine user. And then perhaps the most powerful of the data types is maps. And maps allow me to nest multiple data types together. So I could store an entire user profile in a map where the register is the username, the flag is, has this user received email recently, and a counter is a site visit. So you can think, okay, I get some of the use cases for data types, but the importance of data types, as I explained at the beginning, is that data types have built-in conflict resolution. So I'm going to walk you actually through what the conflict resolution for each of these is. So counters in 1.4, each actor keeps an independent count for both increments and decrements, and upon merge, the pairwise maximum of any of those two actors will win. So if one counter holds 172 and the other holds 173, 173 wins. That's the default resolution behavior. For a flag, it's enable wins over disable. Some people have called this flag wins. For sets, if an element is added and removed, the add will win. For a register, the most chronologically recent value based on timestamps wins. And for maps, right, it depends a bit on how they're all tied together, but ultimately, if a field is concurrently added or updated and removed, the add or update will win. We'll be talking about Riak data types in greater detail in a future webinar. Just wanted to give you a brief overview of what they are and how they work. They're very powerful because no longer is your data opaque to Riak. We've provided pre-built data types that allow you to model your application domain in more richer ways without having to logic around conflict resolution. In Riak 2.0, we've also enhanced security. So often the story around security with Riak, if you're familiar or you've read our documentation or you've talked to us in the past, was put your database behind a firewall. And that's still very true. Put your database behind a firewall. But Basho works with 1/3 of the Fortune 50. Those are our customers. We work with the smallest of startups to the largest of enterprises. And in all of those scenarios, we had questions around security. And while it is still important to put your database behind a firewall, in Riak 2.0, we've introduced authentication and authorization. Authentication, very simple. It's the verification of a user identity. This ties into PAM systems. It can be keys. You could look at it with certificates. You could use user pass combos. Authorization, then, is the verification that a user or a group of users has the right to access data or to perform certain functions. So Riak administrators can actually grant permissions to access, modify, delete objects, to change bucket properties, to run MapReduce jobs that could be a very heavy load that I may want to limit who has the capability to do that. We'll continue to explore and expand our security story over time, but it was important that we add authentication, authorization, some PAM capabilities so that you can integrate it into the system of record that's true for you as an enterprise, and we've done that in Riak 2.0. As the Director of Technical Marketing, I'm definitely a biased voice when I speak about Riak. But one of the things that I find most compelling about Riak is its ease of operations. There's nothing greater for me than when I'm working on a case study and one of our customers said, oh yeah, we used to have alerts set up so that when a system died in our sharded traditional relational database environment, someone would get up, they'd get a pager, they'd figure out which replica set had failed, they'd make sure the master was back up, and then they'd go to bed. But with Riak, we just changed our alerts to send us an email, and we handle it in the morning because Riak keeps running. If there is nothing that we do better, one of the things that's incredibly powerful about Riak is that it enables your operational team to sleep, and it enables them to do that at impressive scale. So keeping with that theme, in Riak 2.0, we've actually changed the way that we do configuration management. No one wants to read nested Erlang tuples syntax at the command line in a config file. So we've actually changed our configuration file in its entirety to an easy-to-parse, transparent format. It enables simpler integration with the automation framework of your choice. If you're a Chef fan or a Puppet user or you're rolling your own scripts, If you are doing DevOps style automation and infrastructure management, then you probably want config files that you can easily logic about. That's what the new config files look like. All the configuration settings except for replication, which is part of the Riak Enterprise offering, are stored in the riak.conf. It gives you the ability to run simple commands like Riak check config effective, and it will tell you what your current effective configuration is. You can get information about any of the configuration settings directly from the command line. It's substantially easier to use and easier to reason about. Riak 2.0 tiered storage. This is actually very interesting. If you're not familiar, Riak has the option for pluggable backends. So we can have LevelDB, which is a log structured storage, or Bitcask, which is great if your entire key set fits in memory and you're interested in exploration, or the memory backend, which actually doesn't do any disk persistence. In Riak 2.0, with the LevelDB backend, we've actually provided for tiered storage capability. So LevelDB automatically identifies frequently accessed information and places it in a higher level. If you're familiar with the structure of a LevelDB style system, you'll know what I mean when I'm talking about level 0 and level 1. With tiered storage, though, we actually provide the ability in Basho's version of LevelDB for you to split data files across 2 mount points with differing I/O performance. So I may, for example, have frequently updated and modified and read sets of data that are in higher levels, and I want to store those on something that's slightly more performant, and I'm willing to store less frequently accessed data on traditional spinning Rust versus Flash, say. The result of this, though, is what really matters, which is consistent, more consistent, 99.9% tile latency when you're reading recently written data or when you're modifying existing data. So the user can actually configure when to cut over the data from the faster to the slower mount based on the level that that data lives at. And then LevelDB just handles the rest for you. So with that in mind, I think it's important to understand a few things about Riak. Often when I speak to the press or to analysts, they ask me, so what verticals do you work with? Riak is actually a horizontal solution. So we see customers in the media, like the weather company, who say, a massive data explosion is at the center of our growth strategy. Riak is a critical component of our new IT platform. And they're ingesting terabytes of data daily. That's more of a media company. We see similar stories from the NHS and others in healthcare, from Temetra in utilities, which could also be considered an Internet of Things style deployment with their wireless meter readers, from social deployments, from web companies, from gaming companies. Anywhere where availability, scalability, fault tolerance, and operational simplicity matter, Riak could be a very good fit. In Riak 2.0, we've continued to simplify this by adding a new search capability, which is Solr alongside Riak, and Riak actually managing the Solr process and simplifying index creation and index distribution, which is the hardest part of any distributed search offering. We've done this with Riak Data Types, which allow Riak to handle the complex conflict resolution that occurs for a broader variety of data types, but also provides engineers and developers the ability to reason about their data domain in a more rich way than they could have in the past. We've done this by changing our configuration subsystem, by adding security capabilities, by adding additional capabilities like tiered storage, by bucket types, etc. Riak 2.0 was many months, nearly a year in the making, and we're quite proud of the capability. An excellent point now where either Manu or myself would be happy to take and answer any questions you may have.
Okay, Tyler, thank you for that. I do have to apologize to the audience. We've had our fair share of technical issues. Like I said, Tyler is speaking to us directly from the States. The session is live, so these kind of things happen. I am glad to say, however, that Riak is far more consistent than the internet connection that we've enjoyed on this occasion. So, but with that in mind, we have had, and thank you for that, a number of questions come in from the audience during Tyler's and Manu's elaboration on Riak 2.0. And given the time that has run out and the few minutes we have available, I'd just like to try and get through as many of those questions as we can. So the first question that we have here comes from Richard, and Richard is asking a question that's quite common, I think, to a number of businesses. He's basically saying, you know, we have many different databases in our company already, and giving examples of Oracle, MS SQL, Teradata, Hadoop. So the question is, you know, why bring in another database? Why sort of further dilute that picture and bring in another data store option? So Tyler and Manu, if you'd like to comment on that, please do.
Yes, I'm happy to take that one, Mladen. So Richard, this is you're right, this is a very common question we get with all of our customers. And if you think, for example, of the NHS, who were, I mean, they're like any organization. They're using a very large number of data repositories or data platforms or databases. In their case, Oracle was kind of the main one. The reason why they decided to switch is because of the cost. Cost of licenses was the primary driver, and they were trying to reduce cost. And the second one is they were trying to reduce operational cost. So in their case, they had dozens of Oracle database of separate servers running various parts of the NHS services, whether it's doctors' reports or prescriptions or patients' records. And because all of these databases were existing as individual entities, that meant also they had a lot of ETL processes, export, transform, and load processes between this database to try to synchronize some of that data, which added to the complexity and added to the overall cost. So by migrating to Riak, where they deployed one very large cluster of more than 100 nodes, they basically managed to reduce all the operational costs by reducing the number of people that would be involved in operating that cluster. Typically, a 100-node cluster requires only one person, whereas if you had dozens of Oracle databases, you probably end up with dozens of database administrators. So that's one cost. The other one is all the ETL that was being managed by separate products and separate systems and separate servers is gone, because now all the ETL happens inside Riak. That's another massive win. But more importantly, I can relate the story of some of the investment banks I've talked to recently, and a lot of people have that same concern of why introduce a new technology, and especially a database where typically relational database is the de facto standard. And that investment bank, one of the tier 1 investment bank, did a study of trying to understand how many of their applications actually require a relational database with ACID transactions. And they discovered that only 10% of all their use cases require relational ACID transactional use cases, and that all the rest could be served by the new generation of databases that are far more cost-effective, that scale much better, that require much less operational effort to run. And again, that relates to cost reduction, but also flexibility.
Okay, thank you for that, Manu. Tyler, did you want to comment on that at all? No, we may have lost Tyler, so we'll just move on to the second question whilst we re-establish that connection. So we have an interesting question in regards to the CAP theorem and the difference between Riak 2.0 and Riak 1.4. So the question is basically, does Riak 2.0 try to please too many people by offering configurability on eventual consistency in order to sort of silence the critics of eventual consistency? Manu, could you comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. That's a very interesting comment. You're right. With the CAP theorem, what it says effectively is you can't have consistency, availability, as well as tolerance to partitions. You can only have two of the three. Riak, by default, with its default configuration, is an available and partition tolerant system, and it's eventually consistent. So you're trading off consistency. But in Riak 2, we're introducing new mechanisms to allow you to write in a strong, consistent manner to Riak. So whereby you're quite happy to trade off a little bit of availability or maybe a little bit of partition tolerance to achieve consistency. We offer that availability, that possibility now. What it becomes particularly useful is if you want, for example, to deal with user profiles or user account or shopping baskets or, for example, betting scenario, you want to make sure that, for example, if you update a user password, you want to make sure that password is being updated and there's no two versions of it. So consistency is critical there. And not all use cases, as I mentioned just before, not all use cases, not all data interaction requires consistency. So you get, in all applications, you're going to have cases where most of the data can be treated with eventual consistency, but there's a few elements where you require consistency. And Riak is kind of becoming, or is able to cover more and more of the use cases that were typically reserved for relational ACID compliant databases. So we're really happy and really excited with Riak 2 because that means more and more users and more people can use it for use cases that they couldn't before, therefore benefit from all the availability and low operational cost of Riak.
Fantastic. Thank you, Manu, for that comment. Now, here's another interesting question, and one that we, I guess, in the world of databases hear a lot in terms of various database options. So what's specifically being asked is, how would you compare Riak and MongoDB, and the fact that many companies find Mongo very easy to start with?
Good point. We're often, we're often being asked these kind of questions. I think some people came up, or someone came up with the NoSQL term, which in a way is a great term to describe the new generation of databases, the one that were based on the principle that you don't necessarily need relational and ACID and transactional for everything. Mongo is, I would describe it as the one that tried to address the kind of simple, low-scale type of use case, which in all fairness represents 90% of the use cases. And it is true that MongoDB is an incredibly user-friendly, developer-friendly database. But Mongo was never built for scale. And if you look at on the spectrum, Riak is on the opposite of that. Riak was built for availability and scale, first and foremost. And for a lot of businesses with critical needs, availability, they wouldn't trade off availability and scalability for anything else, even for developer friendliness. So I think we see a lot of people either realizing that availability and scalability is very important to them and therefore will select Riak de facto, or they may start with Mongo because of the appeal of for developers, and then may one day end up having a need for scale and realize that maybe it's a bit harder than they thought with Mongo, and may look at Riak, in which case we would be more than happy to help them.
Thank you, Manu. I think that that sort of settles the question, to be honest. Another question that's really interesting, and I do apologize, we are receiving a flurry of questions now that the webinar has sort of ended, and we won't be able to answer all of them, but we will try and honor as many of them as we can. So moving on quickly to the next one, Alexandra is asking, can you say something about the latencies? So specifically, they have a situation where they have 10 nodes, and one of the nodes updates some entities that then need to be replicated to all the other nodes. So he's asking, can you comment in terms of latencies in regards to Riak?
Okay. There's probably two types of latency we need to talk about. One is the latency for the end user, so how quickly can they access and retrieve data or write data. And the other one is latency for replicating data in the backend. So on the first one, Riak was designed to be a very low latency system. There's a number of mechanisms that were put in place to achieve that, both within an internal cluster, but also between data centers. So Tyler mentioned multi-data center replication. Riak can be deployed across multiple data centers and ensure that data would be replicated between each data center, so you can have local availability of your data. This is extremely important for companies like gaming companies. Rovio, the makers of the Angry Bird games, the most popular game on mobile phones. Rovio is deployed in multiple data centers to ensure that they can offer that low latency access to the data. And this is quite a common scenario for multi-data center deployments. The other type of latency is how quickly data gets replicated in the backend once you write it. And here, even though Riak is an eventually consistent system, we're talking of latency of milliseconds before the data gets replicated. If the network works and if things are fine, we're talking just milliseconds before all the data is replicated correctly. Now, in cases where that doesn't work because there's a network partition, Riak has a number of mechanisms in place to ensure that data will get eventually replicated, or get a number of self-healing mechanisms to ensure that as well, which means, again, that it makes Riak a very operational-friendly database.
Thank you, Manu. To sort of quickly move on to the next question, we have Zolt asking, is Riak using connected Erlang nodes or hidden nodes with Erl-connected_all false option? So just to repeat that, is Riak using connected Erlang nodes or hidden nodes with Erl-connected all false option?
That's a good question, but not one I would be able to answer on the spot. So I don't know if Tyler is still on the line. If not, I propose that we capture this one and get back to this.
We will email Zolt with the answer, or send the answer to him in some way. So just to try and sort of answer a couple of other questions. So Rui is asking a question that I think many of our audience will want to know. He's specifically asking, is there a book or good technical material to help us in learning correctly Riak capabilities and, generally to sort of start with Riak and, live with it day to day? Obviously, there's the little Riak book, but Manu, would you have any other suggestions?
No, I think the little Riak book is, I personally consider it the Bible. It's a great book to get started and understand all the concepts, the fundamental concepts that are behind, that are making Riak what it is. It also, to get from 0 to 60 or 0 to 100, if you talk in kilometer per hour, I would strongly suggest that everybody read that book. It doesn't take too much. You can go over it in one day or a weekend. You get plenty of hands-on experience, exercise. So my advice is don't go too far. Go to www.thelittlereactbook.com and you can download your PDF version from there.
Okay, well, the questions sort of keep pouring in, but I must say that we have time for, at the most, 2 questions, and I'll quickly ask the first one. So we have a question: what tools are there to help in detecting bottlenecks and/or wrong configuration issues in Riak?
Very good question. So there's probably a number of ways of dealing with that. One, Riak includes a number of monitoring tools or troubleshooting tools. A lot of customers use the standard ops tools like Nagios or Graphite to monitor Riak. So Riak exposes, especially Riak Enterprise exposes all the metrics that you would care about. But I also would definitely recommend for people to look at Wombat, which is a product that's being developed by Erlang Solutions. And maybe Mladen, if you want to give a little bit of an overview on Wombat and what it does.
Yeah, I'll tell you very briefly. So Manu, I think is completely right to sort of direct this towards Wombat. We here at Erlang Solutions have recently developed a operations and maintenance technology called Wombat OAM. And it is effectively a tool born out of our customers telling us for years now, they lack visibility into their Erlang nodes and clusters. And we've obviously reacted to that by saying, well, we'll develop a technology that nowadays collects just over 100 pieces of individual metrics across the nodes and the cluster, raises alarms, posts notifications, helps you orchestrate, helps you deploy code. Wombat is currently in its 1.2, guys, and you can find further information on our Erlang-Solutions.com website. So it's definitely worth seeing. And in terms of further information on Wombat, please contact us. Send me an email, as you can see on the slide, on the bottom of the slide that you're currently seeing, and I'll be happy to provide further information. Alternatively, we have had a webinar on Wombat, so on our website you can just go to the recording of that webinar and get some extensive detail on Wombat. Manu, thank you for that. One final question I would ask, and that's all that the time will allow. One of our audience is asking, why did you choose Solar specifically for Riak 2.0?
That's a good question, and one that we often get asked. So when we started looking at improving search in Riak 2 years ago, at the time, and still to this day, in fact, Solar was by far the most widely used, adopted search engine on the planet. It still is the one that has the widest community and the widest number of deployments in large enterprise. So from our point of view, it was perfectly the right move to go and support Solar because it had the strongest level of adoption. It's clear that in the last couple of years, another search engine called Riak Search has gathered a lot of media attention and press attention and a lot of adoption. It's a great tool. It gets a lot of very interesting benefits or features that Solar doesn't necessarily have. Frankly, it's not totally impossible that we may look at supporting Elasticsearch as well. But to date, with Solar integrated into Riak 2.0, we offer a very strong, not only search engine, but a search engine are also, the first thing of a search engine is to count the number of occurrences of words. It's also a very powerful analytical tool for analyzing streams of data. So we're quite excited about introducing Solar in Riak 2.0.
Thank you, Manu, and unfortunately that's the last question we could accommodate given the time remaining. I would just say that we here at Erlang Solutions are equally enthusiastic about Riak for its specific use case because it's simply proven through industry applications its significant capabilities. Now, I'm sure you will all join me in thanking Manu and Tyler for a very inspiring talk on Riak 2.0. Our apologies for the technical difficulties we've encountered with the live broadcast, but hopefully the Q&A session made up for some of that. Many thanks to all of you in the audience who have joined us for the webinar. Please join us again for our next month's webinar, which will be advertised shortly. Following today, we will send you a short survey to make sure we capture your feedback on today's webinar. And please also note that we will try and make the recording of the webinar available on our website and obviously try and sort of rectify the issues that we've had by possibly re-recording the webinar itself and then posting it on our website, which is www.erlang-solutions.com. Thank you all once again, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.